Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Alicia Dianne Art. I'm Alicia Dianne, and we are discussing our first book in Art as Activism, Black History. So I just want to share that the book that we're reading right now is Africa 101, the Wake Up Call, and it's by Arikana Chihambori Kwao. So Her Excellency Arikana Chihambori, and we are going to be reading chapter 4 and the first half of chapter 5, because chapter 5 is a really meaty, loaded chapter. It's a really, really good chapter. There was things in there that I had never read before. There were things in there that I mean, and I've been on this journey for a minute. I've been talking about it for a while. Like every time that I come back here, I let you know that this journey for me didn't start, right here, but I've been actually, trying my best to learn and research over the last several years. So, there was still a lot of things in there that I just hadn't heard before. And unfortunately, it was a lot that was really, really heavy, and a lot that was it's hard, like I said in the last video, it's hard to read, but it's good to know, because we really, really need to understand our history. If we don't understand our history, then I don't know what we're doing. We're definitely not doing something right. But let's go ahead and pick up on chapter 4, and this one is the effects of the Berlin Conference. So it says, after the Berlin Conference in 1885, the colonizers continued exploiting Africa and mercilessly abusing the Africans. Many tribes fought back, but lost as they were using inferior weapons. It was not until the 1950s when the Africans began to wake up and demand independence. Colonization as it stood, and I'll just be reading my highlights as usual, was no longer sustainable. One by one, the countries began to receive political independence from their colonial masters. It says, while the countries have been given political independence, they were, however, denied economic independence to this day. Even the political independence is questionable in some cases, as former colonizers still have control over who leads the country. That's something that's actually very interesting, because today I was actually watching a YouTube short by Amanda Seals, and she was talking about the political freedoms that we think we have in the United States that we actually may not really have, which really, it's something that I've thought about many times, and I don't know if you've thought about it, but um, it's just something to ponder. Like we, in so many instances, in so many situations, there is like a facade of freedom, or a facade of liberation, or like another inch, or even another foot, and even like in some cases a yard of progress. But lo and behold, there's like 20 million miles that aren't even being shown to us. So I just want to point that out, that this is happening here, through this facade of this idea of liberation from colonization, when in many situations and circumstances, and in many in many instances, I think that's the word I was looking for. In many instances, it's not really a full liberation, and those are the things that she talks about and really iterates really well in this book. She goes on to say, whenever discussing on the whenever discussions on the chopping block in of the I'm going to start that sentence over. Whenever discussions on the chopping block, it doesn't say block, it says chopping, but I always want to say block after chopping. I'm sorry. Whenever discussions on the chopping up of Africa come up, it is common to have educated African elites express the view that we cannot keep talking about the Berlin Conference. This came up very recently for me, when I was recently on the board for an African charity, doing work in Kenya, and it was kind of like, what was said to me by another Black woman was like, all right, well, we can't keep talking about history. What are we going to do now? When I actually had a proposal of like a whole list of things that we can do now, but I wanted history to be part of the conversation. But so many people just don't want to, or not ready to, or are afraid of history, or are afraid of not being accepted because they embrace history, are afraid of not fitting in because they want to talk about history, or they want to talk about reparations, or they want to talk about um, social economic equality, and they're afraid to talk about history because they don't want to be perceived as one of those liberated folks. And it frustrates me to no end because history has to be part of the conversation. I'm going to keep on saying that every time that we meet, and every time that I get the chance to. History has to be a part of the conversation. Anyway, I'm going to go back to what she was saying. So I'm going to read that sentence again. Whenever discussions on the chopping up of Africa come up, it is common to have educated African elites express the view that we cannot keep talking about the Berlin Conference. They argue that after all, it happened over 100 years ago. My usual response to them is that as long as we have small countries like Togo, Benin, Rwanda, and Burundi, in fact, all African countries for that matter, the Berlin Conference remains alive and well. Tiny African countries have the same sovereignty as India, China, the United States on the world stage. How are these tiny countries with their small economies expected to compete with powerful countries such gigantic economies? So she's saying that, uh, when it comes to like world trade, when it comes to world power, and just the rights of individual countries, small countries that were divided intentionally into these small territories are supposed to be competing in the same market with much bigger giants that have much more control over larger groups, over a larger political system. They have a larger economy. They have literally larger landmass because their country barriers are many times bigger than the small countries that were divided during the Berlin Conference. So that's the point she was making. She does give like an example of like a lightweight versus a heavyweight boxer, and she says, "For heaven's sakes, where is the parity when the Gambia has to negotiate with China, Burundi with the United States, Lesotho with India, and Togo with the European Union?" The blunt truth is that the Berlin Conference set Africa on a losing path. No single African country, considered a sovereign nation on its own, can survive in the long run. And it says, Togo has parity when negotiating with the state of Delaware. Nigeria has parity when negotiating with the state of Texas. It is important for us to understand that the aim of the Berlin Conference was simply to create African countries so small that they are doomed to fail. The overall strategy was to have African economies that were so small that they would be easy to destabilize should the countries somehow manage to succeed. Indeed, the looting continues to. I'm going to start that sentence over. Indeed, the looting continues, but it is in a different form. Unfortunately, there are no serious conversations about the Berlin Conference and its effects on modern-day Africa. We naively assume that Africa can simply move on despite the inequalities and exploitation that continue to this day, as the colonizers never left Africa. The Berlin Conference left Africa in a losing lane, so it's important to just remember that. It is definitely a disconnect in our understanding of the link between what was done 135 years ago and what is happening in Africa today. It is in Africa's best interests to understand and properly study and educate the younger generations about our history. Marcus Garvey said, "A people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." That was a quote that she actually put at the end of the previous chapter. And it goes on in my next highlight to say that the Berlin Conference affects our ability to trade with each other as neighbors. This is especially so because our different currencies and different languages. The situation is so ridiculous that it's easier for an individual countries to trade with the US dollar, British pound, sterling, or the European euro than with the currency of the neighboring country. So it was also put in place that it is it's incredibly difficult for neighboring countries within the continent to trade with each other, to travel within each other, for tourists to go from one country to the next. It's still in place that it's been made incredibly difficult, and that was with intent. It has to be. The impact of the Berlin Conference of Trade and Investment and Economic Development in Africa has been particularly devastating. Other obstacles are intercontinental trade, are non-tariff barriers, the most prominent of which are the unending territorial barriers set up at the Berlin Conference. Trade barriers restrict imports and exports of goods and services through mechanisms other than the simple imposition of tariffs. The transport goods or travel by road or rail from one country to another, one has to endure long waiting periods at so many borders throughout Africa that at times it is not even worth the trouble. So it's just made like trade terribly difficult. Air travel is equally affected, and she's talking about tourism now. So she goes into say airspaces over African countries are closed, and they're only open between they're only now being open thanks to the AU's, the African Union's single African air transport market, which I didn't even like think about, like the over the airspace, like what that like what are the laws that go beyond that? Where are planes able to travel for trade? I didn't even think about that before. The need for multiple intra-continental visas make it very difficult and frustrating to travel to neighboring African countries. And then she talks about like how long the waiting periods are for American tourists to try to go to African country, especially if they're going to more than one. They have to actually submit the visa more than once to get a separate visa for each country. So you can't just go and submit both at the same time. I didn't know this because I haven't traveled to the continent myself yet. And it says, it is obvious that these roadblocks emanating from the Berlin Conference have a terribly negative effect on tourism, trade, and investment and economic growth in Africa. Africa has some of the best tourist destinations in the world. It receives a measly 4% of the world's tourism dollars annually. And I think that's actually very unfortunate because people are when they're traveling, they're going to I talked about this in the first video, like people are traveling, they're going to Europe and they're going to um, Middle East or Asia, but so many people are leaving out when they can go to these beautiful places in Africa and the African continent. And even if it is difficult to go to one country to the next, I think it's worthwhile to go to one African country versus going to like three countries in somewhere else. you know, like give it your energy. If I have the opportunity, which I would love to, I would definitely want to be going to, taking, you can go to pick a country and go there 1 year if you're able to travel internationally. The only place I've been internationally is Barbados. That's where my family's from. So I've been to Barbados, but other than that, like I hope that I can actually, travel to many. It's actually one of my goals to go to all of the African countries that I can. So I would love to be able to do that. It says the colonizers' second method of conquest and a major strategy they used in colonizing the Africans was to sow the seed that programmed our people to believe that anything that and everything African was bad and undesirable, while everything European was better and more desirable. And we'll talk about Europe in the next chapter. Chapter 5 really gets in there. It says this remains one of Africa's biggest challenges, resulting in the shackling of the mind. This is the singularly biggest hindrance to true liberation of Black people around the globe, which I definitely agree. There's so much of a roadblock that we all need to overcome, and that so many like this such a stigmatism around African culture, African people. I see this like I see this more often than I would like to. I think there is definitely communities that are and have been embracing a sense of pride, and this has been going on. So then, not to say that this it doesn't exist, because I've seen it exist too. But it really saddens me when you see like the opposite, and you see people just like shutting it off or shunning it. And it does come from the way that we're taught and the way that we're brought up, that anything African is not good, anything African is bad. I know that was a sentiment that was put on me when I was a younger person, and it took me learning and growing myself to really understand, oh, hey, this is something that is not natural for me to like not be incredibly proud of Africa as a place where my ancestors have come from. And it's a and everything that I've learned about it has been so great, and I just want to just share that sentiment that we should have a sense of pride. Like, we're learning about all of the things, all of the pain and the atrocities that have happened there, because it's so important for us to know that part of history, so that we're not giving, God, how do I even put this, so that we're not placing judgment, and so that we're understanding the full picture, and we're seeing the full picture, and that we're understanding that we're even stronger than we ever knew that we were, because of so much that we've come through and overcome, and are still growing past and getting beyond. And I think that that's so important for us to know. And I'm glad that she brings this up, because I think it's a really clear point, and I don't think that we always talk about this. It's a difficult topic to talk about, the stigmatism of Africanness within the Black community, and the African diaspora worldwide. I think we need to address that as well, to really be able to grow as a people, and to really, I really think that understanding the history is that really, really strong key part that's missing. It could be more, it could be less, but that's really what I think is a big part of it. So releasing those shackles of the mind, as she says, most of us are not even aware we are suffering from the disease, yet we are in the intensive care because of it. As Black people around the globe, we are wounded people and we need healing. I liken Africa's challenges to that of an ailing tree. The leaves, flowers, and fruits are all dying at different times of year. These equate to Africa's perennial problems of youth unemployment, poverty, hunger, poor infrastructure, lack of access to affordable health care, lack of access to quality education, or poor governance. And I think that could be where what I was just talking about is coming from too, because we're seeing like images, we're shown images of like poverty and disease and corruption, but we don't understand where those things are coming from. We just think, oh, well, this is just seems like it's not a nice place, for them to have these issues. But when we understand the full picture, and we understand where these things are stemming from, and that it's not a problem with the continent, it's a problem of what has happened to the people of this continent, and that they're still overcoming that, and we can still overcome that as a people. And I just think that is so important to state. It's not just about the images we see, but understanding why we're seeing those images, and that is not the full picture. Okay, so it says, it turns out that the tree's problem is in its root. Until the issues of the root are addressed, nothing is going to change. The Berlin Conference, by deliberate design, is one of the major root causes of Africa's problems. Until this root cause is addressed by Africans coming together and eliminating the boundaries which were imposed upon us, no sustainable development can occur on our continent. To us, Africans, I say, it is time for us to unite and speak with one voice, as one Africa and one continent. This is how we eliminate the Berlin Conference, as her children, the legacy of colonization and neo-colonialism, as well as the rule of divide and conquer. This is the only way Africa can get off this losing lane and hop onto the winning path of true economic liberation. So that is chapter 4. So she is calling for the continent of Africa to be one country, which I think is an incredible statement. I would love to see it happen. I don't know how, but as they say, like, you never know how. It's like you don't need to know how it's going to happen. Um, but if enough people believe it and enough people uh, put that into some forward motion, I believe it can happen at some point in time. And she says, she puts in a quote here from Marcus Garvey. It says, "Liberate the minds of men, and ultimately you will liberate the bodies of men." And she put in another quote from Harriet Tubman. It says, "I had reasoned this out in my mind. There was one of two things I had the right to, liberty or death. If I could not have one, I would have the other, for no man should take me alive." That's Harriet Tubman. And also after each chapter, again, she does cite her sources, and she does give it an Adinkra symbol. So this is chapter 5, and it says the evils of colonization. And this is a heavy chapter. Please get this book. It's so good. It's on Kindle. If I haven't mentioned it already, it's only $10, but it is there's so much information in this chapter alone. I was kind of blown away. We're not going to finish this whole chapter today, but I'm going to get to as much as I can get to you guys in the next couple of minutes. So let's go on to the evils of colonization. It says the atrocities committed against the Africans during colonization are scantily documented and rarely discussed. All right. Africans were considered inferior beings to the colonial masters and were subjected to extreme inhumane treatment from them, much like what happened